Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, a part of our series, Advice and Perspectives from Friends of UConn, where UConn Center for Career Development will bring guests to you to talk about their career journey in these tumultuous times. We're presenting a mix of alums and experts on starting, restarting, and surviving career-wise in this economy. My name is Lisa McGuire, and I'm with the UConn Center for Career Development. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so that you know how to participate in today's event. You should see your attendee interface on your computer desktop in the upper right corner. You're listening in using your computer speaker system by default. If you'd prefer to join over the phone, just select telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. Today's webinar is designed to be interactive with a Q&A format. I'll ask Mike some prepared questions, but the value of this session is to have your questions answered. You'll have the opportunity to submit them to us by typing into the questions pane of the control panel. We encourage you to send in your questions at any time during the presentation and we'll address them throughout. Note that today's presentation is being recorded and will be provided to you within 48 hours. With that out of the way, let's get to the reason we're all here. Please let me introduce our guest, Mike Barbarula, Associate Attorney at Ryan DeLuca. Mike received a Bachelor of Arts degree in Political Science from UConn in 2009. While at UConn, he was a member of the baseball team and was named a Big East Conference Academic All-Star. He was also inducted into the National Political Science Honor Society, Pi Sigma Alpha. Mike received his JD from Penn State in 2012 and was inducted into the Order of Barristers for his achievements in trial advocacy. Mike is currently active in several legal organizations in Connecticut and serves on the board of directors of the Fairfield County Bar Association. Welcome, Mike.
Good to be here.
So first of all, we are glad to have you here with us, but can you take a few minutes to share with us a little bit about your career journey beyond the basic bio info that I just gave?
Sure. So like you said, I went to UConn, graduated in 2009. I'm born and raised in Connecticut. And it feels like other than the 3 years I went to law school, I never really left. I graduated with a degree in political science, although it was my third major while I was at UConn. I came in as a journalism major, thinking I wanted to be a sports writer, but then ended up changing, went into the ACES program for a little while. Hopefully it's still called ACES, I don't know. And then found that I really liked the political science classes, changed my major. And decided I wanted to go to law school and become an attorney. I wanted to be a trial lawyer and had wanted to be a prosecutor. So that was kind of what I took my classes going to Penn State for. Graduated from law school in 2012, took the bar in July and passed. And unfortunately, there were no jobs available in 2012 because the legal market hadn't recovered from the last recession in 2008. So I worked as a clerk for a little while and then started at the firm I'm currently at, Ryan DeLuca in Stamford. In January 2013, I mostly practice in the area of insurance defense. I represent people who have insurance policies who've been involved in motor vehicle accidents or who have had people get injured on their properties, construction companies who have product defects and stuff like that. And I've been there now for 7.5 years.
Well, that's great. So can you tell us a little bit about, so you sort of had a plan, but you actually crafted it while at UConn, which is kind of cool because a lot of our students and alums do change majors. And it's heartening to hear that you can navigate through and get your degree and sort of, so around, it looks like maybe junior year, you decided you wanted to be a prosecutor, litigator?
Yeah, it was around the end of sophomore, start of junior year. I was trying to decide what I wanted to do, and I have long been, I played baseball growing up, and I walked onto the UConn baseball team, and one of the thoughts I had was to coach and to teach, and unfortunately, I think sort of what I realized was that I really wanted to coach, and I really didn't have that much of an interest in teaching, so that sort of fell by the wayside, and I really do love political science, and thought I maybe would go get a PhD and be a college professor or something like that. But I found I didn't like to write, journal articles as much as that would have entailed. So, I like talking to people. I like helping people. And so that that led me to the law.
It's not like you don't have to write a lot for law school or the law, but
Right, exactly. It's a different kind of writing, though.
right.
It's persuasive white writing. It's yeah, a little different than the journal writing that I thought you would do as a PhD.
Sure, I understand. So around that time, you decided that litigator, prosecutor, and can you tell us then? So you graduated in '09, and you'd already decided you wanted to go to law school. So I suspect the economy didn't have a huge play in your decision to go to law school. But would you say that there is a difference in applications for or ability to get into law school because of the economy? Do you think others maybe decided to go because of the economy? What did you see around you?
Yeah, I do. I do think I remember hearing people say, one of the ways to try and wait out the recession that we had in 2008 was to go to graduate school. And I don't know whether that's the best advice, and I'm not sure I would recommend that to anyone. But it was certainly something that people were thinking about back in 2008. And I think now, looking back on it 10 years out, I think my advice to graduates would be, to take a look and see what you really want to do with your career. And, if going to graduate school is something that would help further you in your career and you think it's worth the investment, then I think it's a good idea. But I think, especially in light of a recession that we're in right now, it's a good opportunity to sort of reflect and to think about what it is you want to do and how it is that you can go about getting yourself there.
Sure. So some of the things you might weigh are the cost, right, of the graduate education versus what you make when you get out. And so tell us a little bit about so you graduated from law school. Had the economy rebounded by 2012?
I don't think so, and certainly not in the legal market. It hadn't. They were still jobs were still sort of constricted. Law firms, at least that I know of, were still deferring people for a year. If you worked at one of the big law firms, what would happen is you might get a job offer after your second year of law school, but then sometime in your third year of law school, they might ask you to defer for a year. And I had heard that was happening quite a bit. I remember after I graduated, the state of Connecticut had a budget freeze and a hiring freeze, and so they weren't hiring anybody, not just for legal jobs, but for any jobs. So I think it's pretty fair to say that, that the economy had not recovered, at least by the mid to late 2012 area.
So what did you do? You went to law school. Now there's hiring freezes all over the place. There's just deferrals, et cetera. Now you've got this big bill for law school. What did you do?
So I had heard that there was a job opening to be what they call a temporary assistant clerk in the courthouse. And what we essentially do in that job is we sit in the courtroom and assist the judge as his courtroom clerk. We process motions for the courts. And it's a pretty good way to be in court, especially for me who wanted to be a litigator, to start to meet people, to try and build my network, to talk to other lawyers about what they did, because we had a lot of interactions with the attorneys who were appearing in front of the judges. It was not it was a part-time, full-time job, I guess I would call it. It was full-time hours, but not necessarily a full-time job. Hence, it was a temporary position. Didn't have any benefits, didn't have any sick time, anything like that. But it was a means to get, in the system. It was a means to get myself in front of the people who I wanted to work for, so that I could meet them. And it ended up working out well, because one of the attorneys that that tried a case in front of the judge I was working for ended up being a lawyer at the firm that I now work for. And was the partner that I actually have now worked for 7.5 years.
So let's explore that a little bit, because I know that I've talked to a lot of students and recent grads about that whole basically networking, right? So how did you, first of all, it sounds like that clerkship, does somebody have to have a law degree to do that, or can it be?
Yeah, it actually can be anyone.
Okay.
They generally prefer them to be recent law grads, but no, anybody who's interested in maybe being a lawyer can, apply to those jobs and talk to the chief clerk and see if there's any openings.
Hmm. And so then how would you broach that networking with people who you're seeing across the courtroom, but not necessarily meeting? What do you suggest for that networking piece?
Yeah, so it's a delicate balance because you're in the courtroom and you have a judge who's ruling on the motions, but so what I found was the best way to do it was to just keep your eyes on the job boards, um, because these firms that are hiring will post their job openings, and when they do, then you can you send in a cover letter and say that we're in court when so and so tried a case at the firm, and then maybe they'll remember you. Um, there's sometimes some scuttlebutt in the hallways, and you can hear about jobs that way. But just by being there and being in that area, you learn about things, and you learn about people who might actually know of other openings or might be able to tell you about openings that aren't necessarily posted. So I think my advice would be if you're interested in something, whether it's the law or whether it's something else, and you can get yourself in maybe even at a lower level than maybe you want to work at, it can at least get your foot in the door and get you in front of the people who you want to be with if you want to apply for that job. And I think as the economy shrinks and more people will be applying to the jobs that are open. And I think the companies and people who are hiring tend to hire the people that they know, or tend to hire the people who've been recommended to them. So if you can put yourself in front of those people, or know those people, or know the people that know those people, I think that's pretty helpful.
That's right. Networking, networking, networking. As awkward as that feels for a lot of people, it's just talking to people, right? It's
Yeah,
communicating.
it's really just interpersonal relationships.
Mhm.
I've called it leveraging your contacts.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's really just person-to-person relationships, and that's when somebody knows somebody, they may take them over somebody they don't know you know if all
Exactly.
things are equal.
Exactly. So a question, which I think you partly answered, at least partly. What did you do exactly after you graduated from law school? And was there a time period between graduation and getting that clerk job?
Yes. So the bar is actually the bar exam occurs at the end of July, and I
Mhm.
graduated from law school right around Mother's Day. So from those 2 month that 2 month time frame, I essentially full time studied for the bar, and then I applied for and heard about this clerk job a couple of weeks after I took the bar, and then started the last week of August.
So how did you pay your bills? Did you move home? Did you?
Yeah, so I lived at home, um, you know, uh, while I studied for the bar, and while I worked as a clerk, and I moved out of the house after I got my job at the firm I'm currently at. But it was helpful to have parents who lived in the area where I was working. So um, you know,
Mhm. So you got this job doing it's insurance work, right?
yeah. So it's a private law firm, but we are retained by insurance companies to represent their insureds. So, for example, if you were involved in a motor vehicle accident and the person who you were in the accident with claims that they were injured in that accident, they'll file a lawsuit against you. You turn your claim over to your insurance company. Your insurance company hires a firm like mine to represent you pursuant to that insurance policy.
So that's a little bit different from what your dream was. So walk us through a little bit of how that you pivoted, and do do you now find that you still want to go in that other direction, or what did you find about yourself and about the role, and sort of give us a little bit of background on that?
Sure. Like I said, there was a hiring freeze in the state of Connecticut, and really the only way to get a job doing criminal law is, you can either be a criminal defense attorney at a private law firm, or you can work for the state as either a prosecutor or a public defender. And so, most of those jobs weren't available at the 2012 timeframe. So, I got a job, and what I liked about it was that I was going to be in court all the time. It's a little different because it's civil as opposed to criminal, but it still let me try, still gave me the opportunity to try cases. It still gave me the opportunity to take depositions. I still got to argue motions. So for me, it was similar to what I had wanted to do. And, if we're being honest, I was a little naive and didn't really know that this sort of field even existed when I was in college and in law school. I didn't really know about it, at least until I started working as a clerk in the courthouse, that this is how the personal injury system worked. So they hired me, and I've been there now 7.5 years. I worked with a bunch of great people and great attorneys. We have a great staff. They've been good to me, and I see no reason, so long as they'll have me, I don't see myself going anywhere else.
So this is sort of an unexpected surprise, not surprise. Unexpected is a surprise by nature, vice versa. So you didn't know it existed. So along those lines, maybe a suggestion to the audience about pursuing things that maybe you don't know a whole lot about?
Yeah, I think it's important to be open to opportunities, especially in a economy where there aren't as many jobs. If you can get yourself into the industry that you want to be in, it may not be, like I said before, it may not be the job you want, but it might get you on the path to being in the job you want. And even if it doesn't, you might find that you like it. You might find that, it's less, the job that you want is great, but you might also really like the people that you're working with. You might really like the work that you're doing, and you might find that that's okay too. I don't think that there's a be all end all in this.
Yep, I think you're right. So let's shift a little bit to a little broader. You were active on campus, obviously, when you were an undergrad. And again, this is like in lawyer speak, hearsay. But your friends, what did you see in the economy? Do you feel like more of your friends went to graduate school? What did they face? Did you feel like your colleagues in your poli-sci classes who were thinking of going to law school changed their path, or the ones who were going to go into something else changed? What are they doing now?
So a lot of the people who were political science majors did end up going to law school, although I do know that there's at least a percentage of people that I went to school with that I then would take classes. You take the LSAT if you want to go to law school, or at least you did. Now I think they're starting to accept the GRE.
Yeah.
But
if that now.
If that, exactly. But so I took classes to prepare for the LSAT, and even some of the people I took the LSAT prep course with didn't end up going to law school. So what did they do? I don't know. But I can tell you, at least for my friends, I think I had 2 roommates most of my college, most of my time at UConn, and one of them, got a job working in IT. He was an economics major. Got a job working at IT at a company that his sister worked at in sales. He stayed there for 5 or 6 years and actually transitioned recently and is now a life insurance agent. So something that's not totally related to what he was doing, but also not related to what he was doing. My other roommate was a coaching major, wanted to work in sports. And I'm sure you know how hard those jobs are to get, and especially in 2009. He ended up, he had an aunt who was a producer, and he got referred to a job at MLB Network right when they started in the 2008-2009 timeframe. So he actually worked as a receptionist. He answered phones. because he thought that was his way in. And now he's moved out of the New York area, is back living in Boston. He works for nonprofits, but he found that those were the kind of things that he liked doing. One of my other friends is a teacher, always wanted to be a teacher, got a degree in biology, and then went on to grad school. And I have another friend who's on his 5th or 6th different career since 2009. And I'd be lying if I told you that the economy didn't have something to do with it. But but he's happy, and that's really, at the end of the day, I think happiness is more important than any of it. So.
Yep. I think that's the point. We might think we know where we want to go at this point, but life throws all kinds of curveballs, no pun intended, all kinds of curveballs in sometimes, and it always works out, right? Sometimes it takes longer than we expect. I'm going to go back to the law firm, the law area, because we're getting a couple questions more specifically about the field, which is great. So one person is asking, how do you plan to grow within the firm, or you don't really want to suggest that you would leave the firm, so from a job security perspective, but if you're settled in the job, how does one grow in a law firm? I guess some folks just share that with some folks who may not be familiar with the way law firms operate.
Sure. So every law firm works a little bit differently. So I can only sort of speak for what we do at my firm. But when you're a younger lawyer, one of the things that they start you out with is doing legal research and doing discovery and answering questions, asking questions, doing that kind of sort of initial, sort of what we think of as the initial litigation stuff. As you get more experienced, they start to take depositions, where you put people under oath and ask them questions about what happened. And in my field, we ask them about their medical treatment and how they're doing and those kinds of things. And then, as you get a little more experienced, they start to let you go to settlement conferences and mediate cases where you try and resolve them. Not every case ends up at trial. In fact, I think I tell people 99% of cases resolve in one way or another before they actually ever get to a trial. But sometimes they resolve with an arbitration, which is a trial-like process. And, it took me 5 or 6 years, but I did my first arbitration a couple of years ago, where it's essentially a full dress trial, but in front of another lawyer who writes a written decision on the case, and that's the binding decision. And so as you get older, they give you a little more responsibility. So those are the kind of things, the ways you can grow. And you can also grow in the size of your practice. I mean, when I started, I was doing car accident cases. I did slip and fall cases. We're just, these are tort cases where the only issue is who was at fault. Now I do a little bit of everything. I still do car accident cases, I still do slip and falls, but I do construction litigation. Somebody builds a house and there's water in the basement, and why is there water in the basement? And you have to get to the bottom of it because it can be complicated, and there's subcontractors and general contractors and architects and design drawings, and you have to figure out exactly which of these people, caused the problem that's there. I do some product liability cases where you have like a toaster that malfunctions and causes a fire. And so that's kind of how I've grown. I've gone from doing one sort of discrete area to try and broaden it a little, to do a little bit of everything. And I do some commercial litigation with, I'm working on right now a fraud involving $50 or $60 million right now.
I don't think people are as aware of the different types of law and different types of jobs and tasks, if you will, that are involved in sort of some of these lawsuits. So that was great to sort of give a little bit more information. I have a question on what should I do if I want to specialize in a certain type of law, which is, you wanted to and you pivoted a little bit. So I guess part of your answer is going to be open, right? Because you don't really know. And but this person is looking for, what if they want to specialize? Do you have any suggestions?
There's absolutely nothing wrong with specialization. And in fact, I think that, my wife is an attorney, and she did more of a general practice. And I think that, I think there's something to be said for specialization. But, if you want to do that, I think in your thinking about going to law school. I assume that it's probably a question in terms of I want to be a lawyer and I'm thinking of specializing. But you know, take those classes that will get you, you know, that sort of baseline understanding, but also go a little broader. You know, you can take classes that are sort of still specialized. You can take classes that are a little more, you know, you want to do like environmental litigation, but you still have to know civil procedure. You still have to know property law. You still have to know all of these other fields that build into it. You know, for example, I do some product liability litigation. Well, that's torts, and that's civil procedure, and that's evidence, and that's trial practice, and that's, you know, so just think about what it is that you want to do, and then think about all of the things that you need to be able to do that well. And I don't think there's anything wrong with specialization. I think it's good, but it also narrows your field a little bit, and it narrows the places that you may work. And you know, so I just think that specialization may be great, but you may also, you know, want to look a little broader as well.
So if you were talking to a student who has just graduated and he or she is looking to go to law school, but in this economy, they just don't have the finances, you know, things have happened within their family or whatever. So they're probably going to maybe thinking about taking a gap year.
Sure.
What kinds of things what kinds of skills should they develop that are going to help them in the law field? So what kinds of jobs should they maybe consider taking for a part-time or temporary basis before maybe going to law school? Or is there any advice you have for just sort of that gap year period, so before they go to law school, because law school is no longer an immediate ability?
Sure. You know, you could, if you want to be actually in the legal field, you could try and get a job as like a legal assistant or a paralegal. And especially now that everybody's sort of working remotely, you can see I'm here in my house where I've been for the last 2 months, and we're doing everything remotely now. And there is an advantage if you're a younger person who has the technological savvy to be able to work remotely. You know, I think I mentioned before we went on the air here that I've transitioned from going, you know, having all of this paper to having no paper. And I think that there's something to be said if you're technologically savvy and working as a paralegal, because I think law firms would be open to that kind of experience. Outside of the law, I think you need to be a good writer. So if you could get a job, you know, in any sort of a writing field, whether it's writing ad copy or working for a newspaper or, you know, doing something like that. When I was on campus, I was a tour guide, and that was really great because it gave me experience public speaking in front of people. And you know, we try cases now, and my job is to argue things to a group of people and help them see things my way. So, you know, I think you know, you could think about what it is that you want to do in any field, whether it's law or whether it's something else, and think about the skills that you need to do it, and then think about jobs you can get to help you develop those skills. And so those are the kinds of things that I would be looking to do if I was in that position.
That's great, thank you. So I need you to take your crystal ball out here a little bit, and because we've got a great question about what are there areas of law that you see as being better situated after this economy lightens up or gets better than others? So, you know, are there some areas of law that are maybe going to slow down, or there's some that are going to start booming? What do you think?
Well, I think there could be, you know, maybe a rise in employment law claims as people, you know, may lose their jobs or, you know, have claims with various unemployment and stuff like that. So I think there could be some sort of discrete increase in employment. I think insurance, if you're doing, you know, first party litigation, and what I mean by that is like if you're a policy holder and you're trying to get insurance coverage. I mean, I know we've already seen the first business interruption lawsuits have been filed. For those people who don't know, for companies that have insurance policies, they usually come with business interruption insurance, and that protects you in the event that you're unable to operate your business. But there's a general exclusion for pandemics. However, some lawsuits have started to be filed that said, well, the insurance policy should still cover it anyway. And so there's definitely going to be some insurance litigation arising out of that. What could drop, at least in the short term, I think, is like housing litigation, real estate foreclosure litigation. Those have all been postponed in light of the pandemic, and rightfully so. So those are going to take a little time to recover, I would imagine. But those are, I think those are some of the things I at least can see right now.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Although maybe the foreclosures, now that they're on hold, maybe there will be a huge, hopefully not, surge at some point down the road. You just, like I said, you need a crystal ball. But
exactly, yeah. No, these are uncertain times, and so it's changing by the week.
For those considering law school, what are the parts of being a lawyer that you love, and maybe the parts that you don't necessarily love? And this would get to, I'm the kind of person, just as you said, I'm the kind of person that likes to talk to people and work with people versus in the back room, or vice versa. So for you personally, what kinds of things do you most enjoy and least enjoy in the law field?
So I think the thing that I most enjoy is putting a plan together and executing it. Being a lawyer, at least doing what I do, is all about preparing for the potential that you're going to have to try a case. And it's about putting together a compelling story. And so what I really like is putting that story together over the time from when I first get the case to the time that it ultimately resolves, whether that's at a mediation, at a settlement conference, through a motion, however that is. I like being able to put the plan in action that I developed to try and be successful. What don't I like? I mean, I would love it if lawyers would be a little less, how do I want to say this? Lawyers, we are by our nature adversarial, but I don't think it has to always be that way. I think at the end of the day, we're both trying to see justice done. We just maybe have different views of how it should be done. And so maybe I think there a little more collegiality would probably be good. And my guess is that most people who are lawyers would say the same thing.
Yeah, I think that's societal too. So it's not just in your field. So I'm gonna go back out away from the legal specific field for a couple questions, just because just more generally and change. And so, this is a normal time of change for graduates, right? They graduate, they transition from college to career, but to layer that onto that transition, they're living in a virtual world, and arguably, this generation is used to technology, but not so much, not like this. So can you share with us the impact on the virtual environment of your life? I mean, you've been home, you just said you've been home for two months. Maybe compare a day in your life now versus a year ago. Did you ever think that who thought that we would be this virtual? But really, what do you see the changes and long term, like how will it affect next year? What do you think will be like next year being a lawyer trying to practice law?
Well, we've been talking about it a lot at my firm because we're trying to anticipate some of the changes that we think are coming. There's a question as to whether we're going to try any more cases the rest of the year in the courts, whether they're going to be able to, with the current social distancing, to be able to put 12 jurors in a room together. I don't know whether that's going to be, whether there's going to be any, whether anybody's going to want to do it, whether anybody's going to be able to do it. So I think, there's going to be a question as to, can we try cases virtually? I think Texas tried their first case virtually last week. And I don't know how I feel about that. There's still something to be said about being in a room with somebody. to try and argue your case. We've moved, our depositions have now moved virtually. Just like I'm talking to you right now, I sometimes, last week I took a deposition like this. And I don't like it as much, because you don't get as good of a read as you get when you're sitting across the table from someone. But I do think that this is probably, the technology is probably here to stay, and that's probably, in some respects, a good thing. In my field, what we have is, we have mediations, and the insurance company sends a claims adjuster who's the one with the authority to settle the case. And usually they have to come in person for those. But now we can do these all virtually, where I can stay in my house or stay in my office and do them there. And that's good, because it cuts down on cost, which means that ultimately that cost gets passed on to the consumer. What was it like a year ago? Well, I might have a conference in the morning in court, and then a conference in the afternoon, and then a deposition. Or, if I'm in the office, I'm talking to my colleagues and we're bouncing ideas off each other. That stuff has all essentially stopped. We've all been inside in our houses for the last 2 months, apart from each other. And, the
Right.
most we're talking to each other is over email and by text. There's a lot of human interaction that has gone away in all of this.
Right. A lot of some of our audience are also not recent grads, but maybe they're people who have recently lost their jobs. Do you have any suggestions on how to stay positive and maybe pivot? We did get a question on do you have any suggestions on how to network with somebody outside of your regular field, that in a field that maybe you'd be interested in pursuing, to our point earlier of, try something. You never know, if you don't know what you don't know, right? So do you have any recommendations of how to, somebody who has lost their job recently and might want to pursue a career in the legal area, or how to stay positive?
Yeah, that's definitely a good question. I think, as I just mentioned, there's not a lot of human interaction. So
Right.
I actually think if you're interested in a field and you can find somebody who's doing the job that you want to do, ask them to talk. Ask them for 15 minutes of their time to go on Zoom and talk to them about their career. My guess is that they'd be willing to do it. It gives them somebody else to look at, somebody else to talk to for 10 minutes, instead of staring at my computer screen at the same paper I've written for the last 4 hours. So, I know I'd do it. If somebody asked me for 15 minutes, I would say absolutely. How to stay positive. Just, this is tough. There's no doubt about it. But if you can get through this, my guess is you can get through most anything. So, and you're not alone. You're certainly not alone. This is a tough time for everybody.
Right. That's great. If you can get through this, you can get through anything. I think many of us feel that way. Right now. It's tough. So to that end, you'd be willing to talk to anybody for 15 minutes. So would you be willing, if any in our audience are interested in following up with you and chatting with you, maybe through LinkedIn or through the Husky Mentor Network, how could they reach out to you if you'd be willing to do that?
Yeah, sure. You can certainly reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can reach out to me. I think if you Google my law firm, Ryan DeLuca, my page is on there, and you can see my email address. You can certainly reach out by email. And I think I'm registered in the Husky Mentor Network. So if anybody has any questions, I think they can get in touch with career development, and they can put them in touch with me. But yeah, certainly happy to talk to anybody.
Yeah, Huskies helping Huskies, right?
That's right. That's right.
We appreciate that. Is there anything else that you wanted to share with our group? It's a tough time for everybody, but I think you've given us some good insight to the field of law, and sort of pivoting a little bit, having your heart set on one area, but then discovering really by not necessarily by choice, more by accident, that actually there are other areas that are very fulfilling and make your life very happy and and are enjoyable, which I think is great. I really appreciate that. Are there any other things that you wish I'd asked you or that you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, I just think that now is a time, whether you have something lined up or you don't, um, now's a good time to sort of consider the path that you're on and the path that you've decided. And if you haven't, that's okay. Now's a good time to think about it. Just try and think about the things that you like to do, whether it's something that you found you like doing on campus or some job you had in the summer that you really liked, and or something you think you might want to do, and start thinking about putting a plan together or how to get yourself to that end point. And so that's the advice I think I would give to somebody right now.
That's terrific. Well, we really appreciate your time, Mike. And I don't see any other questions. Just do a quick check. I don't see any other questions, but I thank everyone for their comments and questions. We had one of the comments was when you were talking about doing depositions and doing things all virtually, that communication, a good percentage of communication is nonverbal, and that's exactly right. So that makes the job of an attorney a little bit harder, I would think, and a number of other occupations, but yours in particular, I'm sure, makes it harder to do. But seeing no other questions, I want to wrap this up. I want to thank you again, Mike, and I want to thank everybody else for attending today's webinar, which is, as you know, a part of the Advice and Perspective series. I encourage you to follow up on Mike's offer, and if you're interested in a further conversation directly with him, please go to Husky Mentor Network, which can be found on the career.uconn.edu. Or reach out to Mike directly through LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a very valuable networking tool that maybe we don't think of as a LinkedIn, as a networking tool. Reach out to UConn alums. Everybody will talk for 10 or 15 minutes about what they do and how they got there. Are they going to give you a job? Not necessarily, but learning more, those sort of informational conversations are all helpful. So I highly encourage that. As mentioned, this webinar is a part of the ongoing webinar series on careers and issues in the pandemic environment produced by the UConn Center for Career Development. Next week, we'll host Dr. Tatiana Melendez-Rhodes. She's the assistant professor and clinical coordinator at Central Connecticut State University, who teaches future therapists how to help others with coping skills. So that ought to be interesting. Dr. Melendez-Rhodes has overcome many hurdles herself as an international graduate and postgraduate student in the US. Tune in to hear how she's personally succeeded in a down economy and how she's helping others to make a difference today. Please check the Center for Career Development's events calendar at career.uconn.edu for more information about upcoming webinars and more resources for your job search. Once you leave today's webinar, you'll receive a survey on the presentation, and we'd appreciate it if you would complete that and provide your feedback. It'll include a link to register for next week's event as well. You'll also receive a follow-up email within 48 hours with a link to view a recording of today's webinar to share with any friends who may have missed it. In addition, a recording of today's sessions will be available on the UConn Center for Career Development's website. We're excited about sharing more career advice and perspectives from alums and other UConn friends. On behalf of the UConn Center for Career Development and our guests, alum Mike Barbarula, I'm sorry about that. Thank you for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day.
Take care.